I am Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach, and on this podcast, I explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the cycle of generational trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, raising daughters and sons in a sexist world. I am speaking with a clinical psychologist and author, Dr. Joanne Finkelstein. Dr. Joanne Finkelstein is a Harvard-educated psychologist with over 2 decades of experience helping girls find resilience in the face of toxic messages about beauty, sex, and femininity, tackles that predicament in Sexism and Sensibility, raising empowered, resilient girls in the modern world. This book is an eye-opening and essential guide. It's phenomenal, and I highly recommend it. It goes beyond superficial girl power messaging and delves deep into the effects of sexism on children and what we can do about it. The world is full of mixed messages for girls. Stand up for yourself, but do it softly. It's what's inside that counts, but don't gain weight. You can be anything you want, but don't expect to be paid equally for it, and so on. With girls' rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide at an all-time high, Dr. Finkelstein offers a new challenge. How do we teach girls to recognize and cope with these confusing realities without crushing their optimism and belief that they can incite change? We talked about how to talk about misogyny, stereotyping, objectification, and consent with kids of all ages, ways to help girls spot and contest microaggressions they face in school, in the media, in relationships, and in public, steps to recognize and combat sexism in our parenting, and so much more. I truly enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot, and her book inspired me to have many interesting conversations with my own 17-year-old daughter. Please enjoy, and thank you for listening. Well, Joanne, welcome to the podcast.
I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
First question I have for you is, I always like to go to the author's personal story a little bit. And you do have some fantastic ones in the book. You grew up with brothers and definitely experienced some gender bias. I'm willing if you are eager to share a little bit about that.
Oh, yes. It's funny because there's a story that I've been telling recently that's not in the book, but it's really surprised my family that it wasn't in the book. And I realized it was sort of a formative experience. So I live in the United States now, but I grew up in Canada, right, where hockey is, practically a religion. And my 3 brothers love to play hockey, and I wanted to play too. So I asked my parents for a hockey stick for my birthday, right? And to my delight, they bought me one. But to my sort of utter horror, it was bright pink and looked like a toy version of my brother's, right? I've worked with girls and women for the last 25 years in my private practice, and I discovered that every girl has a pink hockey stick story, right? Girls, meaning girls constantly get messages that make them feel unseen, unheard, not taken seriously. And I witness how harmful these messages are to my patients' sense of self and their sense of potential, right? They're like unspoken, these sort of spoken and unspoken messages are like tiny psychological paper cuts that become festering wounds of self-doubt, right? And so back to my family, when I would push back at or get upset about the gender differences I noticed, my parents insisted that they didn't treat me differently from the boys, right? It was really crazy making because I saw all these differences and they had no idea what I was talking about. They would say, you're being too sensitive, or stop being so dramatic, right? Classic comments that I now know girls and women hear a lot. So, to avoid criticism, I learned to hide my feelings, right? And it wasn't until years later, when I was doing a master's degree, that I began to truly understand more about my experience, right? And I mentioned in a paper for my developmental psychology class that I'd been accused of overreacting when I felt demeaned. The professor scribbled in the margins, "That's what people say to talk girls out of their feelings." It was like such a validating moment for me, right? And so validating girls' experiences and opening parents' eyes are two reasons why I wrote my book.
Yeah, and it's opening my eyes as I'm reading it. And you're right, sexism is not over, right? We haven't dealt with this issue yet, but some people still believe that we have done. I guess that they'd be the male counterparts. So how can we spot sexism in our day-to-day life, in our parenting with our partners? I brought up your book yesterday to a friend, and she said she read the jacket of the book and she said, "Well, I already disagree with her. I know what she's gonna say." I said, "Why are you like rejecting this? This is good for us. You're raising a daughter." I said, "Don't you want to know?" She said, "No, men and women are different." And she has very gendered, biased ideas, very traditional. And I started an argument, but I guess it's hard. We're so steeped into it. It's so baked into us. It's hard to even like come out of it to see what it is, right?
I mean, what I like to say is that even if men and women are different, right, it doesn't mean should be treated differently. It doesn't mean they should have fewer opportunities. It doesn't mean they shouldn't be represented in spaces that form their societies and their lives, right? Like, politics, tech, finance. Women are underrepresented in all of those places. I think, my mother used to say that to me all the time. "You'll see when you have a daughter, girls and boys are just different." Like, even if that were true, she wasn't able to see me, the person who wanted all the same opportunities. And that's all we're asking, right? I'm not saying, I don't take the stance like every woman should work and it's not okay to stay home. No, of course, right? The whole point is choice, right? So women shouldn't have fewer choices than men. And so many people like your friend say, well, there's been so much progress, right? And you're just not being appreciative. Right. Like, and the progress is men don't legally own us anymore. And as of 1993 in the United States, a husband can't legally rape his wife, right? Women can work, wear pants, play sports, have their own credit cards, bank accounts, businesses. Like, we have come a long way, and we're better off than women in lots of different places. The problem is we're supposed to be grateful for what we do have rather than these so-called nagging ingrates who expect full equality, right? So like the progress that we've made is used to shut down the work to be done. And there is so much that work to be done, right? Like, okay, girls at 5 years old, children don't hold gender biases about who can be really, really smart, right? Girls believe they are just as smart as boys. But something happens between ages 5 and 6, right? Girls go from believing they're every bit as smart as boys to not believing it. So what happens? Kindergarten happens, right? So even though girls are outperforming boys in school, even though girls we know from IQ tests are just as smart as boys, they start absorbing cultural messages about their capabilities and their gender. So it is up to us, parents, to intervene.
Does that mean we should raise girls and boys differently?
I think it means that we do raise girls and boys differently and that we should try to raise them more similarly because, like, where I would argue with your friend, which sounds like what you were doing, is that we're cutting off kind of half the humanity of boys and half the humanity of girls. right? So when we believe girls are more fragile, not as smart, not as adventurous, not as physical, right? We are not helping them learn to be independent, industrious, have agency, right? All kids need a sense of agency to grow into healthy adults, right? And with boys, we're shutting down their emotions, right? And we're telling them not to cry. We use much more emotion focused language with girls, right? This is totally unconscious, right? Which is why I'm like, read the book so you can see all the ways you're unconsciously treating people different, even if you're this progressive parent who believes in treating kids the same. So one example is we use emotion focused words with girls like sad, excited, love. But with boys, we use achievement oriented language like proud, win, best, right? And so we're teaching kids what's okay. And so if we're cutting off this emotional language, this vocabulary to understand who they are and to be able to have good relationships with other people, because knowing your feelings, it requires that. I mean, because good relationships requires knowing your feelings, we're cutting boys off from that part of their humanity. And then we wonder why there's so much divorce, why there are so many bad relationships. I mean, your friend, who I'm sure adores her daughter and loves her and wants the best for her, does she know that 1 in 3 girls will experience dating violence in their teens, right? So we need to bring girls up to really understand that this can happen, what to do if it starts to happen, who they can go to. And of course, we need to be teaching boys not to do that.
Yeah, the beauty standards and the way we talk to our girls and, even us as women, the first thing out of our mouth when we see a friend is a compliment about their hair, their clothing, their weight. And I've never met a woman in my life who hasn't dealt with a weight loss issue, right? But men are not preoccupied with those kinds of worries. They don't go to beauty salons. They don't even put skincare products, yet they have good skins. Like this is so ingrained in us. My own daughter, she's 17. She doesn't use makeup, but she has beauty products. So many that like I only have one moisturizer, it's like very interesting. Yesterday I met a friend and after even reading your book, I met her and I'm like, wow, your hair looks great. What did you do? I love that the way you are wearing colors today because it matches your personality. But then I'm like, oh, I'm doing the same thing. And she said, I love your dress. She gave me back a compliment. So I know why we do that, right? Like we want to sort of boost each other's spirits and raise confidence. It's coming from a loving, intentional place. But can you describe the harms that can do
Yeah.
also?
Yeah. I mean, of course, it's so natural. Like you're saying, that's what we've learned. That's how we were treated growing up. I mean, beauty culture teaches girls that their most important asset is their appearance, right? And research shows most girls across the world believe that.
At what age do you think this like becomes a knowledge? I mean, is it possible to even know?
I'm not sure what the research says about age. I think this was looking at girls as young. Actually, I do think it was at about age 10. Girls start to believe, or girls will say their most important thing about them is how they look, right? So, it's no wonder girls spend nearly double that of boys on their appearance, right? And you can think of it as like, okay, well, she's working on her appearance, he's practicing his instrument or, even his hand-eye coordination if he's playing video games, while girls are trying to fix their so-called flaws, right? And here's the important part, the more other people focus on their appearance, the more they or we start to, we start to view ourselves from an outsider's perspective, right? Our daughters focus on how other people perceive their appearance, their scent, their feel, rather than how it feels for them to be in their own bodies, right? So, in other words, they start to objectify themselves the way other people objectify them. And this self-objectification can lead to habitual self-monitoring. Like every 20 or 30 seconds, a girl crosses or uncrosses her leg, checks her shirt, fixes her hair, right? And it can also lead to shame and anxiety about their bodies, which puts them at risk for eating disorders, depression, and sexual dysfunction. But I think a lot of people kind of know that. So I wanted to go even further, right? Beyond the body. And beyond the body, it actually steals cognitive resources, right? So girls who are self-objectifying have more difficulty getting into flow states, which is what we need for performance and achievement, right? So even if you compliment a girl, you might improve her mood, right? But you'll impair her mental capacity. That's what the research shows. So it's worth wondering how often girls receive a body comment right before, let's say, an important test or a piano recital. So I like to tell parents to think twice, right, before they tell their kid who's on her way out to school that she looks cute.
I know. It's so hard not to do that. It's so hard not to do this. I am guilty of this, and it's so steeped into us. It's awful that we are so obsessed with how we look and but how can we you're not saying let's not compliment people for their tastes or their clothing choices or beauty, but rather there is a way we're not supposed to focus only on the body and the appearances. We can use a better way of expressing that, right? There's nothing wrong when I say to my daughter, you look fantastic. But if that's the only message that she hears and nothing about her abilities and things like that, can you say more about how parents can comment or compliment their children?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are so many things that we can focus on. And of course, character, creativity, things that things that you can't apply in a mirror, right? Is what's important. And yeah, I don't want any parents feeling guilty. I really wrote Sexism and Sensibility in a way that I hope would not make parents feel guilty, right? Like I talk about all the ways that I have done these things too, because it's such a part of the culture we've been brought up in. And so I think the whole rest of the world is giving them messages about how they look. So if we can comment more on their minds and how they think and their ability to tolerate frustration and all of these things that we admire, right, that make people like themselves far more than how their appearance does. Because most girls, especially teenage girls, they don't really believe that they're good looking or that even if they're traditionally attractive and they get lots of compliments, they always think my eyebrows could be better, my nose could be better, more, I need thicker hair, whatever it is, right? So I think that the more we can drive home the point that we think they're gorgeous, that we think they're so beautiful, is when we're wrapping it into other things. Like you've had this great belly laugh with them about something and you say, "Oh, you are so beautiful," right? Or you've had a great discussion about climate change and you say, "You're so beautiful," right? Then they know you mean all of them. And that is what we want. That is how we as adults, we want to feel that we're beautiful for all of us, not because, you know, and we don't lose our beauty the minute we turn 32 and get a wrinkle.
This reminds me of that book, All Fours.
Yeah,
Have you read that book?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's it's like how she's preoccupied about her beauty and at 45, menopause, and the culture is just like so loud and on your face, right? There are messages that we receive all the time that there is something wrong with you and there is the solution, right? This is the American sort of mass media, the social media. The girls are introduced to social media so early on and those Snapchat filters and things like that. Like, what can you say about how can parents, counter that, help their children navigate and have better awareness and understanding? It feels like when everybody's doing, it's kind of that becomes the standard, and parents are lost. They don't know how to stand up for their own values. They don't know how to converse with their children.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, I think you're bringing up such a good point, right? Because girls are in such an important stage of figuring out who they are, and the just relentless focus on their appearance is a constant reminder that they're falling short. right? In
Mm.
social media and every other type of media, they're seeing these skinny women with radiant skin and cartoonish eyelashes, and they come to think that these appearances are normal and attainable, right? They're inundated with products and advice to fix their so-called flaws, right? So they end up spending tons of time, money, and emotional energy chasing this kind of unattainable ideal. Meanwhile, like you were saying, boys, they sort of take a quick shower and throw on whatever's comfortable or functional, right? So the comparison of themselves to the doctored images of friends and influencers is so problematic, right? I mean, as teenagers, comparing themselves comes with the territory, right? But as they scrutinize these posts of their peers, they're measuring their complex, imperfect offline selves against the idealized online selves of their friends and others, which is, it's a two-dimensional, highly curated photo much of the time. When we were younger and coveted the glamour of celebrities, right, we mostly understood that it was unattainable. But our daughters are comparing themselves to peers. And research shows it's much harder to apply critical thinking skills to images of peers, right? So that they forget that Snapchat's smooth, soft skin filter or whatever was probably used, and they just come to the conclusion that they're just not as pretty. So I'll get to what parents can kind of help kids do, but I want parents to know that all of this is harder on girls than it is on boys, both because they use social media more and because of the emphasis that we place on girls' looks, right? So that's another, it's, reason that it's critical for us to raise girls who don't overvalue appearance. So if we overvalue appearance by always telling them how great they look, then they're going to overvalue it. So yeah, I think parents, just adults in general, need to be in constructive conversation with kids about social media a lot, and they will get a lot of eye rolls, but it doesn't mean it's not sinking in. And I cover a bunch of ways in Sexism and Sensibility that parents can approach social media with kids. But one of them is helping your daughter tune into her feelings and encourage her critical eye, right? Ask her how she feels when she looks at certain images or certain accounts, right? Can they stop following an account that makes them feel bad? If it's a friend, right, the social consequences might be too high, but maybe they can start following accounts with empowered messaging by searching, hashtag girl power or hashtag stop sexualizing women, right? And as they become more conscious of their feelings, the hope is that they'll choose more encouraging content. Another way is to share research with them, right? We want to encourage long-term healthy habits. So putting up all sorts of parental controls isn't going to work long-term, right? We call it mentoring, not monitoring, right? So we can tell them that research shows kids feel worse about their bodies when they spend too much time on social media. We can explain or remind them how algorithms are designed to keep them hooked and can literally identify when they feel insecure or worthless and are vulnerable to advertising, right? Because they've paused over a certain ad for, acne solutions or weight loss or whatever. So I don't, kids don't realize how many advertisements they're actually seeing per day. And so if you're pointing that out and you're saying, like, the algorithm is starting to know you, it's starting to know that you worry about your eyebrows and they're going to send you all, so they increase a kid's insecurities, right? And we also, I think, want to sympathize with the tightrope that girls walk, knowing that they're expected to look like this perfect girl. But if they succeed, that they're also going to be mocked for being too filtered or fake. Yet, if they're too natural, that, I don't know, gets them dinged, right, with negative comments or fewer likes. So it's so hard for them to know how to be.
Yeah, you're so right. And also modeling us, right? How we use social media or what for conversing. I deactivated my Instagram account. And, my daughter recently said to me, she's like, I understand why you got rid of Instagram, mom. And that leads to a conversation. She had deleted TikTok and she has not been on it. So having conversations, I think, instead of fear-based conversations, but rather exploratory, right, with our kids, and it, like you're saying, making them think critically is key.
Yeah, it just helps to be curious and ask
Yeah.
questions And make the questions abstract, right? Not about them personally.
Yes,
Because they
yes.
won't get as defensive if it, like if you could ask, sitting around the table, you ask a general question like, do you think social media makes your kids your age feel more lonely or less?
Hmm.
It's complicated because it's sort of both, and it will get them thinking about the things that we want them to be considering.
Yeah, I agree with that. Can you give a few more examples of like that? I think this is a good one. And parents always want concrete ways of saying things. What other things they can say to, not say to their kids directly, but like elicit general conversations?
I think there's all kinds of ways that we can point out sexism in very indirect ways, right? A lot of people worry that we are going to rob kids of a sense of fairness in the world or that there's darkness around every corner if we're constantly bringing up sexism. But I still think it's important, but I like what you're saying that there are these other ways you can do it. And I go into that in the book. I think it's important to be direct and indirect, right? We, as sort of Gen X parents, have just relied on girl power, right? Which is great for kind of engendering a respect for the female gender, but it's not enough to help girls with chronic experience of, these unsavory and unfair treatment that they're going to experience in the world. So that's where sexism and sensibility comes in. And you can, start when, if you have very young kids, maybe you're starting with the media, right? You're just saying, do you notice that so many girls on TV use magic to solve problems? Which could make it seem like girls in real life can't solve problems because they don't have real magic. But that's silly because we know girls are clever, fast on their feet, good at math, whatever, because you're also pointing out to them that it's interesting because the boys, they use physicality and STEM, science and their physicalness too, right? Which is true. All of this is backed up by research. So there are these ways that you're wanting to start to point out. And then as they get older, you can talk about, isn't it like nuts how, we just sort of expect our clothes to cause pain, our bras to be really tight, it's like we're just sort of taught that that's a normal part of putting on clothes, but that's kind of nuts. And so you're sort of slowly but surely pointing out things that happen. And then you can point out even ways that you're sexist in your own home, right? Or you're gender biased, right? Like, you know, I realize I have been asking Johnny to take out the garbage every Thursday. Like, you're perfectly capable of lifting up a heavy bag of garbage and taking it out. So I'm going to like do a little R&R parenting, right? This is what I call not rest and relaxation, although I know all parents need that too. But it's recognizing and replacing, gender biases. And so say from now on, that was silly. I don't want to make you feel incapable. I know you're probably happy I didn't make you take out the garbage, but I think it's important that you know how capable you are because I know how capable you are. And I was just falling into these old patterns.
Yeah, it's interesting. I talked to my daughter, since I was reading your book. I said, hey, this woman writes in her book that regardless of what you're wearing, you still get harassed sexually, the male gaze and things like that, from bikinis to burqas. I just love the sound of that. And my daughter looked at me, she says, yeah, you didn't know? I'm like, no, like I always thought it's the women who wear like, revealing open clothing that get tagged or harassed or looked at. Even as a grown woman, I have to say, I do experience that male gaze, the compliments, the unwelcomed something. As I have experienced that. But to your earlier point, about social media, I discussed something with my daughter. We were looking at someone's Instagram account, and that girl, it just jumped at me that this girl, yes, she's a good-looking girl. She's 19 years old, but majority of her posts on her Instagram wall were pictures in bikinis. She is on a vacation or somewhere, right? So let's say she has 20 pictures, 16 of them are in a bikini. So I said, don't you think it's kind of curious that this person has so many bikini pictures? What do you think that says about her? And I felt like, am I being critical of this? But like, I want my daughter to also think critically. Like, if that's all you're posting, maybe that's also not right. And I know this is a tricky conversation when our children wear crop tops and the skimpy dresses that they go to parties that everybody wears the same thing. Can you help us how we can navigate this conversation with our kids without shaming them, but helping them understand, the potential dangers in the world?
Yeah, I mean, right. It's the tension that so many of us feel as parents, right? We want our daughters to learn that they deserve full body autonomy while also protecting them from a culture that sexualizes and judges them. And the truth is, they're often more interested in being fashionable, not sexy, right? And skimpy is what teen brands are selling, right? So when we call attention to their clothing choices, they feel sexualized by us and become self-conscious and defensive. Right. And what I often hear from girls is that a girl who may not have thought of herself sexually can start to after she's sexualized enough by other people. We tell her enough that crop top is too sexy, right? It becomes this way of taking back power. So we have to learn how to talk about with them so that we don't slut shame them or make them afraid of their bodies and sexuality. Right. So I tell parents, share your dilemma with them. Say, I want you to be able to wear whatever you want. You're not responsible for other people's reactions. And yet, some people will judge or make icky assumptions. So it's important to reflect on what story you want your clothes to tell about you in any given situation, right? And if her clothing choices are bringing her attention she doesn't like or are making her feel unsafe, she should listen to those cues, right? That might mean grabbing a pair of sweats to wear on the train home from the gym, right? We're playing the long game here, trying to help them become critical consumers of the culture and understand that free choice isn't always as free as it seems, right? It's nearly impossible to tell the difference between what we're doing for ourselves because we want to and what we're doing because we feel as if we have to in order to appear acceptable to other people in order to belong, right? And that's particularly true for teenagers in the throes of figuring out their identities, right? They're all about my body, my choice. They believe all choices are valid and empowering. And I mean, they're right, right? Most choices are valid, but without an understanding of the unforeseen forces at play, they're often not real choices, right? I once said to my daughter, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, but a crop top, dieting, or Brazilian wax is never as simple as free choice. My goal has always been to help her think critically about her choices, not to control them. Like, sure, we can forbid them from wearing the clothes that they like and that help them fit in, but that does little for our relationship with them, right? Instead of making it us against the culture, it makes it us against them. Witness the harm. Yeah, I mean, the harm that comes from, like, I see, so, I see a lot of daughters and parents in practice, and I witness the harm that the fight over autonomy in general and clothing in particular causes to too many parent-daughter relationships, right? But we want to discuss faux empowerment with them, meaning, real power is whatever, the fair distribution of resources, political influence, personal agency, right? And so it doesn't come from being hot, right, for the gratification of others. And so we want to just have these discussions. Ultimately, we're hoping that they make choices based on both physical and emotional comfort, right? And if she does choose to emphasize her body, right, remember that I'm just going to repeat what you said, girls in everything from bikinis to burqas get harassed and assaulted, right? There's no research that says certain clothing makes it more likely.
Boy, but can we talk about how the clothing over the years, the fashion has changed, right? Especially in the United States. It's more revealing and more open. Maybe it does go with more awareness and feminism and all of that. We become bolder and all of that. And we like get rid of layers and open more and more. But someone in my daughter's class was doing a project of the eras for fashion. And it's like, wow, like what our grandparents wore and what our children wear is like such a big difference,
Yeah.
you know? But how about when the father tells the mother, are you letting her go like that? Because this is very, very common too. How can that mom, what can that mom say to the father, right, in that situation? Because that's a tricky one too.
Yeah, I mean, I think the dad should read Sexism and Sensibility. And
I
I
agree.
actually I
Yeah.
get so many emails from dads who have read it. I didn't expect this, but dads have been so thankful that they have a way now to talk with girls about their clothing. I think that things have gotten, more and more bare on girls' bodies because it has been a way of taking back power. Historically, we've covered women up to suppress them in their countries, right, where they need to be covered head to toe because their sexuality is dangerous. And this is a girl's way, a way of taking back power to say, my body is not dangerous. Right. You can go back as far as, the Bible, where Jesus says, and I quote this in my book, where Jesus says, if you're tempted, take out your eye. Right. In other words, like it is not the person who you're tempted by's fault. It is up to you to control yourself. And so, I mean, but it's an interesting thing because there are these ways that you're pointing out that girls are much more empowered today. They say, if you point out that girls are in bikinis too much on their photos, they might say, oh, stop slut shaming her because, choice is really important. And that's so much what feminists have fought for. But what I find is that when it happens to them, right? And this is why parents need to be aware and why we need to open up conversations with kids is because they can say it for other people, but when it happens to them, they tend to blame themselves, right? They unconsciously buy into all of these stereotypes. Like they're shouting girl power and they're shouting choice and they're touting that women are badasses. And yet they are believing this sense that they are fragile, that they're not as good as at math, that they are, when they're slut shamed, they blame themselves and they look at what they're wearing, or, oh, maybe I shouldn't have walked down that street. And they're doing all of these things, right? Like if girls do not know that they have you on their side, right? Or if, God forbid, they're assaulted and they don't know this hasn't been a conversation that's been open, they don't know that they can come to you, you know what happens? They blame themselves, right? So the earlier we can talk to kids about this and let them know that we believe them, we're on their side, we don't think culture should treat women the way that they do, the better.
Mm. I heard you, I don't know if it was in the book or in one of your interviews, you said that because of this self-objectification, the harms, it can go so far that they can do even crazier things just to prove that they are autonomous of their body, but sort of more dangerous things in spite of, right? Can you speak about that?
Yeah, Leora Tannenbaum just came out with a book called Sexy Selfie Nation, and
Mm.
she has wonderful interviews with people that have, gone on to do OnlyFans, or,
Mm.
people were stealing their pictures. And so they thought, well, why don't I at least, if someone's going to take my pictures and use them for profit, I may as well, sell my pictures. And so the more that they're sexualized, the more they come to believe, they come to see themselves in this sexualized way.
You also talk about entitlement, healthy entitlement. I really want you to speak about that. How can we instill that in our daughters?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, right? Being
Mm-hmm.
called entitled is
Mm-hmm.
usually a bad thing, right? Something we say when we think somebody expects too much. But over and over, I see girls in my practice who aren't entitled enough, who lack what I call a healthy sense of entitlement, right? And so here's what I found when I dug into the research, right? Girls believe that they deserve less than boys. One of the studies that looked at this phenomenon discovered that it starts as early as third grade. So when 4 to 9-year-olds were given the opportunity to negotiate with an adult for their favorite stickers, the older girls asked for fewer stickers than the boys. Then they negotiated with a male, right? And listen to this reflects the same gender gap in negotiation that we see in adults. And when women don't negotiate their first salaries, and research shows that they often don't if their boss is male, they lose approximately $500,000 during their careers. So we should be asking ourselves, what lessons are we teaching girls, unconsciously or directly, that leads them to believe that they deserve less, right? Especially with regard to speaking up, respect, and money. When it comes to speaking up, we interrupt them, right? Research shows girls and women are interrupted far more than boys and men.
Mm.
When it comes to respect, we teach them that being liked is more important than being respected. So what do girls do? They try to be agreeable, even when they don't feel that way. They prioritize other people's needs and comfort over their own. And what do we teach girls about money? Not
Nothing.
much.
Not
No.
much. Yes.
Don't talk to girls about money nearly as much as with boys, right? The scales are so tipped in boys' favor that we pay boys shockingly more allowance for chores and save more for our son's college.
Hmm.
And that is how we implicitly tell girls money is a man's domain. When girls don't feel entitled to things like speaking up or being treated with respect, it makes it hard for them to protect themselves, right? And it's a very slippery slope from gender bias and sexism
Mm.
to sexual harassment and assault, right?
Mm.
A lot of us are like, what's wrong with being agreeable? We like when our girls are agreeable, right? But you might recall my patient Elena
Mhm.
from Sexism and Sensibility. What she said about harassment was something along the lines of, what's the point of getting so upset? It's always going to happen and you have to get on with your life, right? She learned, like the rest of us, to just let it slide off her back, right? But from a young age, girls are taught to ignore so much, right? Including unwanted touch, cheek pinches, uninvited hugs, hands on their waists, right? And as they get older, it's shoulder rubs, hands on their thigh, or a stranger's touch just passing by or whatever, right? So over time, girls learn to disconnect from their own bodies, right? Which leaves them confused about who their bodies belong to, what's okay, when it's time to speak up, right? And we know that, like I was saying before, when girls don't have someone in their corner teaching them that their body is theirs and theirs alone, right? They blame themselves. So Elena couldn't recognize that she had been assaulted by a man in a car on her way home from school. Instead, she wonders, what is it about me that made that man slow down, grab my arm, twist it, and sniff it? Was it because I was wearing perfume, right?
No,
We understand what's happening to our daughters, sisters, and friends because 90% of teens will experience harassment by high school, right? But if we have taught them over and over again that their body is theirs and theirs alone, they'll know that the culture is broken. They are not broken.
yeah, this reminds me of my friend. She was in abusive marriage for 10 years, abusive in all ways of abusive, including sexual and physical and emotional and economic abuse. And one day I came from work and I had this questionnaire that I use with my clients about abuse. And, my papers were just on the counter and she was having coffee with me. She's like, "What is this?" I said, "Well, it's about about if you've been abused, this is the power and will, control of will, and this and that." She's like, "Can I take a look?" She looked at that and she said, "Wow, I've been in an abusive marriage for 10 years and I only now recognize that what I experienced was abuse." And after that, she initiated divorce. And she's been divorced for a few years now. And I was like shocked. So many people live in abusive relationships, but they don't know that that's abuse. It's so normalized and commonplace that even sometimes when you point out, they don't want to hear that. I've had conversations with women and I'm like, "Well, that's abuse. That's abusive. Are you tolerating that?" They're like, "Oh, no, that's not abuse. That's just like my husband being him, boys being boys." It's like so normalized by us, by women. Right? We're so
One of the
tolerant of this.
Right. We are so tolerant of it. And it's a slippery slope because it starts with just, thinking that it's normal to be shut down when you're trying to speak or to be interrupted or to be laughed at when you say that something somebody's doing is making you feel uncomfortable, right? So it becomes this very slippery slope. But by the time it's abuse, women don't recognize it. And I can't tell you how many women have reached out to me saying, I don't talk, there is a chapter on sexual harassment and abuse of, girls mostly and women, but mostly I'm talking about just the subtle sexism that's chronically in our lives that seems because we've grown up with it, because it's like sort of the air we breathe, or, it's like, does a fish know that's swimming in water? No. So, so many women have reached out to say, oh my gosh, like I didn't even realize all of like my whole sense of who I am has been informed by all of these like psychological paper cuts that you point out.
Yeah, I love that expression that you say, the psychological cuts, paper cuts that turn into festering wounds. It's such a powerful expression. In terms of speaking up, like this was very important for me to raise a girl who can speak up and be assertive and be a badass, especially like against us too. And that's what I want to ask you to offer some advice. Oftentimes I think that a home is the place for them to go against us, like sharpen their ideas, battle us even, to stand up for themselves. Like we don't want to squash their spirits and say, behave, be a girl, be a good girl. Like I can see I accomplished that in my parenting because I
Mhm.
was not that girl. And that was very important to me. And my daughter is very confident, very assertive. Like she knows who she is. And when I was asking some questions from the book, she's like, "Are you kidding me? I'll do this, I'll do that. No one can talk to me like that." Like she already has that sense. But
Mhm.
I was that people pleaser. Shrink yourself, become small, please everyone.
Yep.
Don't say a thing. Like I was that person, and it was very important for me not to raise a girl like that. And I can see she can go against me and say, or against dad, or not in a bad way, but she's okay, in this space to just assert herself in our home so that she can have that practice. Because if we don't allow that, right, how else are they going to do that outside? We take their power away here and we want them to be empowered outside. Like that doesn't work.
Right. I call that a voice of resistance, right? So
Mm.
there's these five voices that I outline in one of the chapters, in the healthy entitlement chapter, right? And one of them is resistance, right? Which is being able to tolerate their anger, their bad attitudes, their different opinions. It doesn't mean tolerating rudeness. Does mean hearing them, learning from them, and accepting that they are not, that they sort of encouraging their strong opinions and bold ideas, right? Like I have a woman who wrote to me saying that she was reading Sexism and Sensibility. She considered herself a very progressive mother who didn't want her daughter to be a people pleaser like her. But by reading the book, she said, "Oh my God," she had this sort of epiphany. I think that I am shutting down my daughter when she has strong opinions, even though my son is more opinionated and, and more outspoken than her. So she went to her daughter and said, "I'm reading this book, and I think this is what I'm doing to you." And her daughter started to cry from the recognition, right? Because she had just grown up with this, like for her, feminine equaled agreeable, feminine equaled easy, right? And even though she would never say the words, be a good girl, there were all these sort of ways that she was sending the message of what that she should be this sort of capital G good. And so integrity, teaching them integrity, right? A voice of integrity, which means help them trade being liked for being respected. So it would be so much easier if your daughter just agreed with you and you could like her so much, right? But because she's fighting you on things or giving her different opinion or not willing to do everything you want, you're sort of like gaining respect for her. I can see it, right? Or you have respect for her. And so it's a different way of being in the world, right? That they don't have to please everyone. They don't have to say yes to everyone. That so many girls are so overwhelmed because they're trying to be everything to everybody.
And the interesting thing about this, the way I raised her like that, I can see she respects me and my opinion immensely. She's
Mhm.
like, "What shall I wear for this event? Do you think this is good or bad?" She constantly, and of course, I have an only child, so we are very close. But everybody in my circle, they're like, "Wow, like she asks your opinion about everything." I'm like, "Yeah, it's like, it's a
Because you've
byproduct.
respected her opinion, so
It's a
she,
byproduct, it's not fear-based. It just happened.
I mean, when I was growing up, right, my mother would give me her opinion of what I should wear, but it was always like what she would have worn or what she wanted me to wear, or when my daughter asks my opinion, it's based on, as much as I can possibly do this, it's always based, like I'm very conscious of making it
Hmm.
based on who she is, the kind of things she likes to wear, the kind of ways she likes to present. So then she can hear it and respect it. And
Hmm.
I might say, some people might see it like this, but you have to decide for yourself if that's okay or not.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, that's why I feel like our daughters can ask us these things because they know we're not going to push our opinions on them and
Yeah.
guard who they are as people.
And I also ask her opinion about things. Like, I really value and respect her opinion on certain things. And I truly value that, you know? But what I want to ask you is like, you are a parent to a boy and a girl, right? And this
Yeah.
is the last question. So, obviously, you are an expert and you were aware of this, raising your children. What was important to you raising your children? Like I told you, asserting herself was important for me. What was important for you in raising your children?
It was really important for me to raise a girl who believed that she had a voice because I did not grow up feeling like I had a voice. And like I said, I saw this in so many areas. I would see these whip smart girls in my practice and women. I see a lot of women too, right? And the girls are like, I'm not smart. I was interrupted. Like they just don't believe in their voice. And the women, to a T almost, come in and like they hear about imposter syndrome, right? Successful women, and they say, I think that's me totally. I have imposter syndrome. Like, I just don't believe I'm smart enough to be in the position that I have. It's like I can't, like I'm about to get found out for being, not as good as people think I am. For my son, I really wanted him to understand the effects of bias and stereotypes on girls and the sexism that so many boys are infiltrated with as they're growing up, especially on social media. But I wanted to be able to do it in a way that would never shame him for being a boy, right? So the effects of bias and stereotypes on girls, we talk about that so much because they are the ones who've been marginalized, who have less safety, autonomy, and opportunity. But boys absolutely suffer too because of masculine stereotypes, right? I've come to understand that we need to raise boys differently, not just to protect our daughters, but also to protect our sons, right? And I talk about, there's a whole section in the book about this, right? My male patients struggle with so many of the same issues as my female ones, right? Anxiety, self-esteem, friendships, romance, depression. But unlike girls and women who often disclose problems to close friends or family, a teenage boy or a grown man is often confiding in me before anyone else, right? Like deep and meaningful conversations among boys is really rare, right? They sort of have to pretend they don't want connection as a ploy to find connection, right? It's just sort of like boy code inhibits them from building these meaningful relationships. So my son always talked about feelings with him. I mean, I'm a psychologist, so thinking about feelings comes really easily. He's a boy with big feelings, and I never shamed him for that. Or, I tried not to there. We all, but I consciously asked him about how he was feeling and what he knows about feelings. So I think the way to really turn around sexism is like the only way to really turn that around is to call out sexism, right? Is to stop making all things feminine bad, right? Boys learn early to repress their feelings and needs, which we know is bad for mental and physical health and gets in the way of them seeking medical and psychological care, right? So we have to allow feelings other than anger to be acceptable among boys, right? And
And we
so
have to allow women to experience anger more, right? Like we also shut that down
that's
in
voice of
girls,
resistance we were talking
right?
about before,
Yeah.
right? Like let them. And so, so like I would do in the home when I would notice things like my daughter used to be very soft spoken, and my son is a very dominant kid. And so he was interrupting my daughter all the time. We all were, right? Because girls get interrupted more than boys. And so if I noticed, one time at the dinner table, he was interrupting her when they were little. And I said, Hey, you know what? I know you have something really important to say, but Gabby's been trying to talk for a long time. And we've got to be really conscious because girls get interrupted more than boys. And I know that you're not doing that on purpose. But we got to be really careful to make room for people in our culture that have less of a voice. And one of those people is girls. So, and then I would teach my daughter how to be assertive, how to say, I'm speaking. Can you say what you're going to say after I'm finished? And so, sometimes I would notice I'm interrupting and say, I really want to hear what you have to say, right? Like, don't let me interrupt you.
Yeah, I like how you say right in the beginning of the book that you're not casting boys as villains and women as victims. It's empowering for both boys and women. We don't want to make it sound like women are victims here, girls.
No. I mean, it's a funny thing because they are a victim of sexism,
Hmm.
but there are ways, we're always balancing the darkness with hope, right? We're showing them how much progress we've made. We're showing them, like, we don't want them to walk around feeling like victims, but we do want them to know that it's not that they have to grow a thicker skin or that they're weak because these things get to them. We want them to know that it's inappropriate and unacceptable and they shouldn't be exposed to it and that they have every right to call it out or to go to somebody.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Your book is so rich. There are so many wonderful topics and chapters. It's phenomenal. I really highly recommend it. Your writing is brilliant. Your points are so measured and arguments are so strong. I really love this kinds of books. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
It's been my pleasure. It's been such a lovely chat.
Good. That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Be sure to hit that follow button so you don't miss future episodes, and take a moment to leave a rating and review. It really helps others find the show. I would love to hear your thoughts and takeaways. Join the conversation in the Authentic Parenting Facebook group or visit the contact page at authenticparenting.com/contact to get in touch. Authentic Parenting is an ad-free show, and your donations is what makes this podcast possible. Support the show by visiting authenticparenting.com/support or becoming a patron at patreon.com. Your contributions make it possible for me to continue bringing you weekly episodes. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.